Hello guys, my name is Inas Al-Khambur. In this video, I will cover the topic of legacy of slavery in two regions of the United States. The first one is coastal South and the second one is inland South. The main reasons of choosing this topic is that slavery is so central to the history of the United States. It is the origins, economic development, society, culture, politics, and law for the Americans. It has left in its wake a wide array of legacies that seems ever present yet unchanging in our world. So, before we start, let's go with the definition of slavery. Slavery is a real condition in which a human is being owned by another. So, slaves were considered by the law as a property that someone can own. Slaves were deprived of most of the rights ordinarily held by free persons. Slavery was a form of dependent labor performed by a non-family member. The slave was deprived of personal liberty and the right to move about geographically as they desired, in which there were likely to be limits on their capacity to make choices with regard to their occupation and sexual partner as well. Slavery exists in a large number of past societies whose general characteristics are well known. One of these societies that was depending on slaves to generate benefits for their own was Americans. Slavery was essential to the making of the United States. The forced labor of at least 12 generations of black created sustainable wealth for men and women of the slave-holding classes. The slaveholders are doctors, traders, lawyers, bankers, farmers, law enforcement officers, judges, insurance agents, salon owners, sailors, and merchants, who all can contributed to and benefited from slavery. So, this wealth translated into a significant political power. The legacy of slavery started when English settlers started to import slaves from Africa to the southeast area of the inland South region. Initially, slaves were imported because of the labor shortage in which the agriculture processes require a large labor forces. The second reason was that the high death rate of the indigenous population after the introduction of Arabian diseases in the early of the 16th century, and the cash crops were manually intensive. So there was a desire for cheap laborers to work. So at that time it was obvious for them to steal people from other areas of the world and force them to work for free, in which several millions Africans had been captured and sold into slavery in the southeast. So 500,000 slaves had come to this area. In 1619, the first group was brought from West Africa to Virginia area of the coastal South. This group of Africans that have been forced to migrate into the region as slaves have shaped the coastal South and influenced its culture. For example, the music, food habits, speech patterns, and agricultural style are still evident in the region in the southeastern Alabama. The smell of chicken being barbecued in a city park in Port Arthur, Texas. The sound of jazz and blues in a New Orleans street corner, and the iron work that is often seen in Georgia. The coastal South was highly concentrated with a high population of Africans, which the most area of the coastal South that included a high population of the African was the coast of South Carolina, and it was called the heartland of Afro-America because it was the port of Charleston that the largest number of African slaves were brought in the 18th century. Most of the residents of the Sea Islands were African Americans who speak their own language, Galo dialect. In 1861 to 1865, the Civil War started due to the conflict between both the northern and southern states because of the economic issues. in which the northern state wanted economic expansion that would change the southern way of life. Because much of the agriculture in that time in the region was dependent on plantation crops, it was believed that success in farming these crops depended on slave labor. However, by mid of 1862, thousands of slaves had escaped and joined the invading northern armies. At this point, the president was convinced that it was time to abolish slavery. Therefore, during the Civil War, the slavery was abolished in the United States. Then, Southern planters and newly freed slaves began to enter into tenancy agreements. Under these agreements, many of the former slaves became tenant farmers or sharecroppers. Tenants rented farmland, owned farming equipment, and kept the money earned from producing and selling crops and livestock. Sharecroppers often owned no equipment and paid no rent, in which they provide the labor to work the land and share this profit with the landowners. So sharecropping became popular after World War when landowners no longer had slaves. Slaves were free, however, many were looking for work, so poor farmers who were unable to buy their own lands rented small lands from the plantation owner in exchange for a portion of the farmer's crops or profit from the sales. Since the poor farmers farmed the owner land, they had to pay the owner back when they sold the produce at the end of the season. Since both regions are located close together and have the same geographical characteristic, both inland South and coastal South have no much differences depending on the legacy of slavery, in which the colonial settlers have imported slaves from Africa to work for free because of the labor shortage, as well as both regions have witnessed the slavery abolition and emancipation at the same time by the mid of 1862. However, the only two differences were that the coastal South had a high population of African American, in which they had residented in the coast of South Carolina. The other difference is that African American have influenced the region of the coastal South by their culture. After decades of emancipation, African American farmers have faced challenges of trying to survive on small farms, which made it difficult for them with their limited access to credit and racism. However, despite racial bigotry and poverty, more than 90% of all African Americans in the United States still lived in the South in the early 20th century. Thanks for watching.